On Friday, President Bola Ahmed Tinubu administered the oath of office on Justice Kudirat Kekerekun as the acting Chief Justice of Nigeria. This follows the expiration of Justice Kayode Ariwola's tenure, who retired from active service on Thursday. The Senate would later confirm her as the substantive Chief Justice of Nigeria, making her the 23rd person to occupy the position. The oath-taking ceremony took place at the Council Chamber of the State House, Abuja, presided over by the President, who urged the acting Chief Justice to defend the independence of the judiciary and promote the cause of justice. The President emphasized the importance of strengthening mechanisms that will uphold and enhance integrity, discipline, and transparency in the judiciary. Arise analyst Frank Tietie joins us now from our Abuja studios to speak on what to expect from the new Chief Justice of Nigeria. It's good to have you here on Newsday. If you can.
Thank you, and my pleasure.
Okay, so let's go straight into it. The first thing that comes to mind are judicial reforms. What key reforms would you expect or hope to see under Justice Kekerekun's leadership, especially in terms of reducing case backlogs, improving the speed of justice delivery, and ensuring equitable access to justice?
Okay, thank you very much. I'm happy that you pointed out from the outset that the dockets of the Supreme Court are actually very full now, with quite a number of cases, and so there's a lot of backlog of cases that are yet to be heard. In fact, for cases that are due to be heard in the Supreme Court, many of them don't even have dates up to 2026. So it simply emphasizes the point that justice is being denied because it's also being delayed. Imagine decisions that ought to be made which have to do with business, which have to do with chieftaincies and all of that. We have to wait for another 3 years before they are assigned dates. Not that they will be heard on those dates, they'll probably just for the briefs to be looked at, and then further dates could also be given for judgments. Who knows when those cases will be resolved. So it's quite embarrassing that the Supreme Court is suffering from that kind of problem. It was Justice Amina Auge, retired, during the Aige Makode Foundation lecture that mentioned that, see, there is a competition among lawyers to crowd the Supreme Court with a number of cases because it is a prerequisite, it's a requirement to be appointed as the senior advocate of Nigeria, to have a number of cases conducted by a lawyer at the Supreme Court. And that has unnecessarily clogged the Supreme Court. Justice Ariwola, in his final statement, address, on his retirement, mentioned that he couldn't understand why every case in Nigeria would have a right of appeal to the Supreme Court, and that it's embarrassing that as a policy court, it ought not to entertain any kind of case whatsoever, but it should be only cases that are restricted. So there is need, and I expect that the new Chief Justice of Nigeria would now set up a committee to decongest the dockets of the Supreme Court. I don't know the particular procedure of what I would say that the standards that they will adopt, but there is urgent need. And to take another look, whether many of those cases are there even have the right of to appeal to the Supreme Court. Not every case should ordinarily exercise that right. There are cases that, and I like the fact that there are cases, labor cases particularly, that should end in the Supreme Court, in the Court of Appeal. But it's a problem we all created. If we could, make a law to dispense with political cases in such a short time, in limited times, in some cases 180 days, why are we allowing cases, particularly criminal cases that do with the rights of individuals, last for that long? Some 5 years, 10 years, and in the cases of, in some cases, land cases, lasting up to 20 years. I think that is an urgent area that the new Chief Justice of Nigeria has to look into. And then we are expecting, too, that the National Assembly will cooperate. In that case, we're looking forward to bills being sent to the National Assembly to take another look at the cases that have right of appeal to the Supreme Court. There is urgent need to reduce those number of cases.
the public perception of the judiciary. Some people are clamoring and they feel that rebranding and repositioning should be a priority. What are your thoughts? How important is rebranding the judiciary?
It's extraordinarily important. But interestingly, it's not the job of the new Chief Justice of Nigeria alone. In fact, many Nigerians do not understand that she's limited in the control of the judiciary with regards to only courts, superior courts. When you talk about perception of the Nigerian judiciary that is experiencing an all-time low at the moment in terms of being branded as, being perceived, I would say, as a corrupt arm of government, many people forget that those perceptions actually emanated from the contacts they've had with magistrate courts, upper area courts, customary courts, lower courts that are outside the control of the Chief Justice of Nigeria. And even courts that are high courts, they can only come under the purview of the influence of the Chief Justice if they are, by reason of the National Judicial Council that exercises some measure of discipline and control over them. Now, there is no doubt about that. There are corruption perception surveys that have been conducted by the National Bureau of Statistics in conjunction with the United Nations Office on Drugs and Crime. And so it's indisputable that these perceptions actually exist, and they are very bad. In this case, putting the judiciary as the #1 bribe taker in Nigeria, not necessarily #1 bribe taker, but that the institution that collects the highest amount of bribes in this country. So it's even making the police pale in comparison to a 5th position. And that's worrisome for an institution that guarantees order, for an institution that will determine whether or not people will resort to self-help. So rebranding is urgent. And what the Chief Justice of Nigeria needs to do is to understand that it's not by dishing orders or, making resounding statements through public relations officers, all that. But I think she should approach it with a stakeholder, engagement, in the sense that bring all the people together. Let's have a sort of a national judicial remedy, conference right here in Abuja, where people will express their concerns and also profile solutions. In that case, there will be a greater sense of ownership of the judiciary. One more thing is this: if the judiciary makes some fundamental changes, like we experience sometimes in the United Kingdom, when television cameras, I'm talking about television cameras and radio transmitters, were allowed to come into higher courts, the Court of Appeal, the Supreme Court, to broadcast live proceedings of those courts, that will be a major shift in terms of guaranteeing transparency, making the people to be closer and to watch the proceedings as they do of the proceedings in the National Assembly. One way or the other, people will get more acquainted. But the sort of opacity, the sort of mindset that many people have, that they don't know what happens in the Supreme Court, where someone who comes out fourth in an election is declared the winner, where someone who didn't participate in an election, who actually contested to become president, suddenly returns and goes back to the Senate, is appointed, and is now Senate president. All of these decisions, the rationale of which are very difficult for the public to understand, may be easily comprehended if there's greater access to the workings of the court. And I think that live broadcast of court proceedings would help in that regard. So we are expecting such fundamental changes to be, introduced in our administration of justice system, to enhance public confidence. And right now, it's very difficult. The problem is very, very, very difficult, because it is those persons who have given bribes that go out to campaign and advise, and give the impression that, look, our judiciary can actually be bought for any price that is right, for any order or any judgment. That's a crisis. So beyond the cases that you say that are clogging the Supreme Court's docket now, the urgent and the most important problem now is the perception that we have a corrupt judiciary, which is most likely not true. Because tell me, where are the statistics that actually prove that a judge has actually collected bribe? So it's a matter of perception. It's more of rumor. However, you can't change it, because the records are there, the statistics are there, that the Nigerians perceive that they have a corrupt judiciary. And that is the judiciary that the Chief Justice has inherited. Something urgent has to be done.
Very, very, very well said. Something urgent has to be done, and that also speaks to the delays in the dispensation of justice, because it still remains a critical issue. So isn't there a role of technology in judicial reforms? How can the new CJN leverage cutting-edge technology to ensure the prompt and fair dispensation of justice across all courts? Do you think that she'll be able to balance that need to respect judicial traditions with the imperative to modernize the judiciary, especially in adopting technology for case management and court proceedings to cut the wait time in half?
Oh, yes, indeed. But because I practice here in the Federal Capital Territory, and many years ago, we have witnessed the introduction of high-degree application of technology, but which never saw the light of day in terms of, transcribers, machines that transcribe spoken words into writing, and then it does the same thing for witnesses and all of that. Now, in addition to changes that have come as a result of front-loading documents and then the filing of written briefs. However, we are stuck with a tradition that requires too much of application of, handwriting, taking notes by hand, and then also a constitutional requirement that, in the way our judgments are crafted, that is, whatever positions or areas of law or points of law that are canvassed by both sides or all the sides to a case are actually, must be reflected in a judgment. You see, when you talk about cases that are clogging the Supreme Court, I would have thought that since the Supreme Court innovated the idea of giving decisions without having to write judgments, perhaps that would help. So that the need and the constant, application of longhand in taking notes by judges. Interestingly, even in advanced, places in Nigeria, like the FCT, where judges still take notes by hand, that is, whatever is said by either a lawyer or the witness. Now, we need to activate such technologies. Unfortunately, in the FCT, with those expensive machines that were installed in all of the high courts that I'm aware of, in some cases in the magistrate court, they never worked. I consider that it was more or less a sabotage, because if you allow technology, perhaps a lot of people will lose their job. Besides, I go back to the issue of corruption again, because the idea that those machines did not work is as a result of the fact that there are some persons who actually run the judiciary beyond the judges, because we think that when we mention judiciary, the judges form a very small number. What about the legal assistants, the registrars, and the bailiffs, and the whole large number of staff that actually decide that carry files and manage all of that. I doubt if that transition from this manual management of our case system in Nigeria can be achieved in the next 5 years, because there is an entrenched group of persons who actually run the judiciary and has given this bad perception that it has today. So the Chief Justice of Nigeria needs to, and again, we must appreciate that she is limited, but again, she is also the head of the Nigerian judiciary. She must now take the initiative to the National Judicial Council to give directions. And with regards to the other important bodies she also heads, so that we can actually have that urgent National Judicial Conference to have to reform the situation. That idea of having to write judgments within a space of 90 days after the final address, it's a problem. So can we think of simplifying those the way the judges give their judgments? Because it seems as if they are up against some opposition that is unfounded. They write judgments as if they will be faulted, or as if they are going through an examination, and so they put in a whole lot, bringing a lot of verbose authorities in order to justify whatever decisions they make. But I think that if we simplify the process of arriving at judgments and the way judges deliver their decisions, we might have some form of speedy dispensation of justice. But the conservative process we inherited from the United Kingdom, even though we have seen that there are reforms in the United Kingdom, we are still stuck in the old ways, and these are constitutional matters and therefore requiring the amendments that may come from the National Assembly.
And I'm so glad you've just landed on that point, Frank, because that's exactly where I want to go. I know Mr. Olisa Agbakoba had made a point that there need to be an evolution from the 1844 model of the English court. You look at countries like South Africa, who are already beginning a process to advocate for departing from Roman Dutch law to something that's more representative of indigenous intricacies. How much of this reform, or shall I call it decolonization, of our legal system needs to happen? And how much scope does the CJN actually have to influence that decolonization?
Oh, very, 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 very wide scope indeed. For example, in the way the accoutrements and, in our apparels and the paraphernalia of our, justice system, all are a reflection of our colonial past. And I think we can break away from that. The Americans have a peculiar way of going about it. I don't see any reason why we should have all of those gaps and then we still, do a whole lot of, application of Latin maxims in the way we express law, even in the law courts. But somehow you need to look at another group of persons whose work actually I would say, has a lot of impact on the judiciary. I'm talking about lawyers. Lawyers enjoy the fact that there is some air of mystery around the application of law so that it can continue to make them relevant. So they like the fact that they wear all of these, the gaps, the colonial gap. They like the fact that the law is mysterious when it is expressed in some Latin maxims and all of that. However, it is, I answer by telling you that it is the job of the Chief Justice of Nigeria to do away with many of these things and in giving directions and in making rules. But she can't do it alone. She has to do it with the various chief judges across the country. But for example, we also expect that collaboration from important bodies like the body of benchers can also help in determining the quality and the requirements that describe our kind of legal practice. I think it's still very much stuck with the colonial past. I canvass, and I cannot canvass enough for an urgent, national judicial conference to address many of these issues. You don't forget that, and I almost didn't mention it, that the fact that we have many cases in court today, we are dragging on for so long, it's not only attributable to systemic problems, but also there's a human part of it. We also have these lawyers who don't actually apply so much diligence in the way they administer their cases. So we have also all sort of adjournments, and then unending adjournments, I would say. And there are cases that will ordinarily could have been dealt with 1, 2, or 3 sittings that have lasted for 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 years, and they are abounding in all of the courts. And so we also that also means that lawyers have to play an important role together with the other important institutions, the body of benchers, and all of the many institutions that the Chief Justice of Nigeria heads, so that we can have these reforms.
All right, then, so let's quickly touch on the creation of constitutional courts to handle political and allied matters, as well as the limitation of the right to appeal, because they've both been proposed. Do you think that this would help reduce the backlog of the Supreme Court? And what would be the potential legal and constitutional implications if these proposals were actually taken forward?
I think we got it all wrong when we allowed the Supreme Court and the judiciary altogether to be deciding political cases. This bad label that the Nigerian judiciary has as being a very corrupt entity is because of the influx of political cases and the influence of politicians on the court. So the starting point is not to create a constitutional court because it's discriminatory. So we seem to pay more attention and more respect to politicians and to the political process. That's why we give that kind of speedy timeline for the dispensation of political cases. That shouldn't be. Why should we think that political cases are more important than human rights cases, or political cases are more important than cases that have to do with foreign investment that determine the quality of life in terms of employment and provision of improvement of our economy? So it's the idea, the trajectory of considering creating special courts, even for criminals or whatever, it runs contrary to the provisions of Section 42 of the Constitution. We are equal. All matters should be considered of equal importance. Now, so if we are talking about reducing the number of cases, limiting the time of, the right of appeal, first we should prevent political cases from getting to the judiciary. For goodness sake, we have just experienced an electoral cycle, and the Supreme Court has just made several decisions confirming whatever INEC has done. Look, it does not go against all form of reason that a small number of persons, like 5 number of persons sitting as members of the panel of the Supreme Court would decide the person who should be governor of a state numbering 5 million or more. So shouldn't we work more in strengthening INEC as an electoral institution to guarantee its independence, impartiality, and competence, rather than shifting that kind of important decision to the Supreme Court? So we should tell ourselves the truth, because the idea of judicial capture that we are dealing with at the moment, that which is surreptitious, which is largely unspoken, that the political class, that the executive has actually captured the judiciary, that the judiciary actually does the bidding of the highest paymaster, is simply because it's in political matters. Please let us let us have a way of giving the judiciary a sort of immunity from all this unnecessary interference. Let me tell you, it is often difficult for a judge to be influenced when it has to do with commercial cases, because there is a lot of conscience there. And then there is less likelihood of attempting to bribe a judge when it has to do with cases of rights, cases with land and all of that. You see judges doing justice based on law, but with the emergence of the decision of on political cases, that judges will now, especially in the Supreme Court, will now make determinations of those who control the real power in a state. That is where the corruption of the judiciary actually started from. So if we are talking about reforms, that we must then tell ourselves the truth. Starting from the National Assembly, please take political cases completely away from the judiciary.
All right, then, thank you so much for being on here. We appreciate your time and your analysis on Newsday.